As I mentioned earlier, this week marks 10 years since the campaign began to save one of our most important cultural institutions in Sydney, the Powerhouse Museum. And for a while there, it seemed things were looking good when the state government promised last year to save the icon. But as we reported earlier in the year, things may not be as good as they seem. Now, I've received feedback from the museum and its management. In fact, almost every time I say the words Powerhouse Museum, there's a note from someone in the media team or elsewhere, either correcting the record or offering to meet and all this kind of stuff. And I'll just shortcut this and say, you don't need to meet with me. I'm the messenger here. You need to meet with highly respectful people who've got great concern about where the Powerhouse Museum might end up. And really, to shortcut this, if they're happy, I'm happy. We just want to give them a voice because many of us in Sydney, and perhaps even with respect to my listeners elsewhere outside of the city, care about this institution and what it stands for. That's not controversial. An expert is claiming the government is seeking to destroy the museum by stealth by chipping away at its character, heritage and capacity to hold exhibitions. They claim the proposed redevelopment will reduce exhibition space at the museum by 3/4 and is part of a plan to transition the space into performance arts and events. And that the proposed redevelopment is going to cost taxpayers at least 3 or 4 times more than the cost of comparable museum renewal projects. Now, I try and be fair as best I can. So when I received, going back to September, a release from John Graham, the minister, that said the Powerhouse Museum Ultimo has had its heritage listing broadened, guaranteeing that the much-loved site will remain a museum of applied arts and sciences into the future. And then I read down the heritage revitalisation will make the museum far more welcoming for visitors, while undertaking needed restoration. It'll also reorient the museum's main entrance to make it more accessible to the public. I mean, you can imagine the millions and millions of people who turn up and say, hey, look, have a look at the entrance of that. I'm not going in there. The important stuff is what's inside, and for many people that's a concern, which is why today I want to get an update with Kylie Winkworth, former trustee of the museum and heritage expert who joins me on the line. G'day, Kylie.
Good morning, Luke.
Now, look, I don't want to be unkind to the minister, and I'm trying to get my head around this, and as I said before, what I want to do is, if there are people I respect, and you're one of those who have concerns and have knowledge of this for not just 5 minutes, but for many, many years, I think because we want to save this museum and make sure it is what it was, we need to hear what you have to say. John Graham talks about a heritage listing and a release going back a few months now. And I actually read that and thought, gee, Kylie and all the other people I know will be happy with that. Turns out perhaps I jumped the gun a little bit. Tell me where things are today, and it's a big question, the concerns you have.
Well, the fact is the Powerhouse Museum is not saved. The museum is being extensively demolished. 75% of its exhibition spaces will be demolished. The heritage listing of the Powerhouse Museum complex is a hoax because buried in the fine print are a set of site-specific exemptions which allow the removal of all post-1980 fabric. So the Powerhouse Museum opened in 1988, and essentially all trace of the Powerhouse Museum, a Sulman Award-winning state-of-the-art museum built for a working life of 100 years, all of that is going to be demolished at a cost of more than $400 million.
Demolished for $400 million?
Yes, and that doesn't include creating any exhibitions because it's not intended that the facility be an exhibition space as a museum. It's very clear when you join the dots and look at the scale of the spaces that the museum is being turned into a performance space. And the trail of this goes back to 2020, after the Berejiklian and Perrottet government announced the Powerhouse Museum was saved, and the museum started consultations on the renewal. The Minister personally asked us to come back and help with the renewal plans, which we did with goodwill, participating in their master plan and curatorial dialogues. Nothing came of those. What was happening behind the scenes was that the museum and Create New South Wales were pursuing the conversion of the museum to a 1,500-seat theatre and performance and rehearsal complex with some fashion and design displays and spaces for creative industries. So that is completely contrary to the promises that the Berejiklian government had made in public only a couple of months beforehand. And a similar scenario has evolved since Labor's very explicit promises before and after the election last year, promising a museum of the highest standard that would continue to display science, design, applied arts, technology, the technical arts and education, engineering. Well, all we know about how they're going to spend that $400 million is there'll be 3 objects coming back to the museum. The whole thing is mired in secrecy, despite Labor's promises of transparency, because they don't want the public to know what their real plans are. Buried in the fine print of the thousands of pages of EIS reports is the vibration, impact and acoustic reports, and they show that the museum is being planned for acoustic impacts for amplified live music equivalent to the Coldplay concert in 2016 at Allianz Stadium. Well, I don't know any museums that are intent on converting their spaces for amplified live music events on that scale. None of them. I've done a comprehensive review of museum renewal projects, both here and overseas, that show this is costing taxpayers 3 or 4 times more than any other museum renewal project.
Goodness me.
And we won't have a museum at the end of it. They might want to contest this, and all they need to do is put those key documents in front of the public and tell us what their real plans are, because I don't see how they can go to what's now at a development approval stage and not say anything about the use of the museum. It's not even called a museum anymore.
No, that's right. They've dropped that word. Look, and you've raised that with me on air before, and I've certainly made commentary, perhaps more colourfully than I should have, in regards to the intentions or the future intentions. There's a response that says there is no intention to provide a live entertainment precinct as part of the Powerhouse revitalisation. The Powerhouse Museum, they say, is an exhibition space primarily, and the revitalisation has been led by the demand for more flexible exhibition space. Now, quite frankly, Kamala Harris could have said that because it makes that much sense. What do you say to that?
Well, I just refer the proponents to the reports that are in the environmental impact statement, which say that they are planning for live music events for thousands of people. And the first acoustic report in the EIS is qualified by a further report saying those acoustic and audience estimates are considered conservative. And it should only be taken as a guide, not rigidly prescriptive. And what they're planning to do is put in further modifications after the development is approved, which is what's happened at Parramatta with the increasing commercialisation of facilities at Parramatta. Well, these documents are based on the event scenario drafted by the architects on the 30th of January 24, showing the patrons and the impacts, and what the proponents should do is put that event scenario and its subsequent revisions in front of the public, along with the secret design briefs that Labor repeatedly promised to release. and has kept secret.
See, that's the point. But that's the point, isn't it? It looks. I don't want to say dodgy. That's going probably too far, but it certainly appears to be something that's behind the wall, and you're not allowed to look at it. I made the point earlier, Kylie, that I get fired up by this issue when I get information, and then we talk to someone like you on air who knows what they're talking about. And then I get a note back from the media department at the museum to say, this was unfair and this was said, and we contest that. This is all done. This is all fixed in 1 hour. That is an hour where you gather in a room, you and your colleagues, and maybe the minister and maybe even Powerhouse management, and you have a free and open discussion. Free and open does not include the signing of a confidentiality agreement. I mean, these people with real concerns for this public asset, they can't have a conversation with the management unless they sign away confidentiality. So they can walk into a room and say, yeah, we're going to blow the joint up, but you sign this, don't tell anyone. That's not the way to do it. If there's nothing to be seen here, have a bloody conversation.
You're absolutely right, Luke, because at the heart of the definition of a museum is its obligation to ethical communication with the public, and that's what's been entirely missing throughout this 10-year saga. Everything about this project is secret. So people are entitled to ask, why is the museum being completely gutted of all of its, of the majority of its flexible exhibition galleries to create just 3 large spaces for uses which they're unwilling to say. And there are no museums that are gutted in this way, and there are no international travelling exhibitions which need spaces of this volume. I'll just say by comparison, because Sydney is a tale of two museums, the Australian Museum received $50 million of taxpayers' money to create a new travelling exhibition gallery, 3,000 square metres. Well, their annual report shows they've had 1,500 on-site visitors. They had more than 500,000 people to the wonderful Ramses exhibition, and that cost taxpayers $50 million. So it is beyond belief that taxpayers are downsizing and destroying and wasting the assets of the Powerhouse Museum to make it smaller and less functional for its core purpose, which is the exhibition of its collections. And they are unwilling to disclose any plans for the exhibition of those collections, though they've been working on this secret scheme for 4 years.
Let me put this to you, then I'm going to have to go, but we'll talk again. This is a note from a listener that I choose to keep that listener's identity private. Historic locomotive number 1 from 1855, which was the first locomotive on the railways, was damaged when it was moved from Ultimo to storage in Castle Hill. It's awaiting damage assessment. After 169 years, it could be scrapped. Have you heard that before?
No, I haven't heard that, and that's quite alarming. The whole move of the collection, which has cost taxpayers more than $100 million, was risky and unnecessary. The museum could have been restored and conserved and renewed in stages, as we demonstrated to the minister, but it was all about gutting the museum to change its purpose. When the caravan moves on, it'll be converted to a performance and theatre space. That's very obvious from the shelves that they're creating and from the vibration impact and acoustic reports. So the proponents say, well, if we're complaining about the lost exhibition space at Ultimo, we can go and see those collections at Castle Hill. Those collections should never have been removed from the museum in the first place at huge cost and risk. It's inevitable that things are damaged in that process because that's actually when collections are most at risk. Yeah. The museum, I think, has been quite careless about the risk to the collection and the cost, because they're desperate to gut the museum and turn it into another empty performance centre, of which Sydney has in abundance.
Yes, that's right.
The White Bay Power Station. Yeah. We've got the Power Station venue on Cockatoo Island. We've got the Cavern the Cutaway at Barangaroo, we've got Carriage Works, we've got the National Art School turning into a creative industries precinct. We only have one major heritage museum. That was closed in February on false pretences by the Labor government that only 6 months before had promised to keep the museum open. So what is going on?
Well, that's a question, Kylie. I'm going to have to go. We'll see. I'm sure I'll get, I don't know if I get a reprimand, but there'll be some kind of answer. And I say again, I'm not the one you need to have a coffee with or meet with. It's people like Kylie and others who know this like the back of their hand and want just simply the words save the powerhouse to mean save the powerhouse. Nice to talk again, Kylie. Kylie Winkworth.